here's what the Guardians did in case you missed it. If you're more of a casual fan and you're not following every last move, the Guardians have made 4 trades this offseason that involved at least one major leaguer. They traded Eli Morgan to the Cubs for a minor leaguer. They traded Andres Jimenez, of course, in a big 3-team deal with the Blue Jays and Pirates, in which they got the starting pitcher Luis Ortiz from the Pirates and 3 minor leaguers, 1 from Toronto, 2 from Pittsburgh. They, of course, traded their second best offensive player, Josh Naylor, to Arizona for a young prospect pitcher who has spent time in the big leagues in Slade Ciccone. And of course, this trade doesn't really include a major leaguer, but I gotta mention it anyway. Miles Straw traded to the Blue Jays for a bag of donuts. In terms of free agency, the Guardians signed 3 players this offseason. They re-signed Shane Bieber, 1 year with a 1-year option. They signed Carlos Santana. They signed Paul Sewald. That was their most recent move. As part of that move, they DFA'd Pedro Avila, who was pretty solid last year at as one of the last relievers in the pen. That's the overview, Zach, and they still could do something, I guess. But what's your thoughts on the overview of this offseason so far?
So I was sketching out my first roster projection for opening day and trying to map out what does this look like. And you know who the catcher is, Bo Naylor. And I think there's not much you can say about him other than they need him to have a breakout year.
That's correct.
Jose Ramirez will be at third. Brian Rocchio will be at second or short. Carlos Santana and Kyle Manzardo will occupy first base and DH. Steven Kwan's in left. Lane Thomas is in center. Second base and right field, no clue. But even in those names I mentioned, Bo Naylor, huge question mark. Brian Rocchio, huge question mark. Kyle Manzardo, I think he's going to hit, but there are questions about him. Carlos Santana's 39 years old.
Yeah.
Lane Thomas has shown flashes of being like an all-star caliber player, but he was not that in his time here last year. We have no idea what to make of Noel. Will Brennan, I feel like I've seen what he is. The second base options, I like Juan Brito. I don't know if he's going to be the guy opening day and just play every day at second base. That they did not get the bat that I thought they needed, and I thought they needed 2 of them. And I just sit here, and you read through their moves, and we had the press conference with Stephen Vogt on Monday just to catch up before spring training, and I sat there at one point, and I'm thinking, I'm like, if I knew nothing about last year, if I've been in a coma for a few years and I just came to this press conference and listened to this guy talk, I would think that this team's in a rebuild. It was all about, well, this guy's really young and we hope he can develop, and we like the path that he's on, and I know how this team operates, and I understand, we can yell about payroll if we want. I'm happy to do it. I feel like I've been doing it for 6 months, or 16 years, but it's just strange to me how the season you had best attendance you've had in years, and you just don't build off that. And you can talk me into liking the moves in terms of how maybe they set up the future, like Luis Ortiz. I like him. Ciccone is interesting. They love his arm. You saved money in many of these deals.
Yeah.
I don't care about that.
I know.
I do give you kudos for trading Miles Straw and getting out from that contract, but who gave him the contract?
Yeah.
So, it's same thing with Jimenez. It is a very, just a very meh offseason. And in a normal year, I might be able to say, it's fine. Okay, I understand what you're doing and I get it. But not after the year you just had when you were in first place all season. It's not like it was some mirage that you got to the Final Four. And the fans bought in, and you just did nothing to keep that momentum going. And it's just I'm not surprised by it. I know.
How could you be?
I know how this organization operates at this point. I also know the state of MLB and just how ridiculous everything is. Like, they're not the only team that had an offseason like this, but they're the only team that made the Final Four and had an offseason like this. So it's disappointing. Like, I hear from fans daily who are like, please tell me there's another move coming. Like, please tell me they have an ace up their sleeve. And no, there's no ace up their sleeve. There's like 3 possible jacks in 4 years if they develop right.
So much to follow up off of what you said. I'm going to leave the pitching for later because you mostly focused on the lineup and not following up on last year. And I want to start with that part because I've been here long enough. You know, some people, jerks, like to remind, oh, you're not from here. You know what? I've lived here a long time now, and I'm probably going to live at least maybe the rest of my life in Cleveland, likely. So I'm part of the community. I'm ingrained in this community. I understand how things work here. And I believe, we all know this is a football town. Nobody's going to argue that. But, Zach, I believe to my core, you know, whenever it gets brought up when the Indians had all those consecutive sellouts, it's always, well, you know, some of that time the Browns weren't here, blah, blah. Okay, make all excuses you want. I believe, especially now that the stadium is smaller, that if the Guardians had I'll say $160 million payroll, and they were consistently having good off seasons and adding good players and doing that with the great infrastructure in front office they have, I believe the Guardians would sell, even if they didn't sell out every game, they'd have fantastic attendance, way better. Like, they'd consistently have good attendance, not be near the bottom. I'm not blaming the fans for if the attendance goes down this year, that's on the Guardians. That's not on the fans. You're 100% right. Last year, the fans not only bought in and went to games, they bought in early. When it even though the team was good, you could have made a lot of arguments that it was a house of cards. And it turned out not to be. They ended up being a good team. But I'll tell you this lineup on paper, and I get it, the Guardians lose the offseason every year. And more often than not, they end up being at least competitive in the regular season. So who knows? Maybe the same thing will happen. But this lineup on paper, all due respect to the White Sox, well, we'll have to put outside of the White Sox, could end up being the second worst lineup in baseball or one of the worst lineups in baseball. I think there's a lot of people that think, well, this young player was okay last year. Baseball is the hardest sport to predict. Great players, good players in basketball and football rarely have a bad season in their prime unless they're hurt. It happens, but it's very uncommon unless a guy is hurt. In baseball, it happens all the time. All the time. You see a guy Cody Bellinger, I'll throw the first name popped in my head. The guy was Rookie of the Year, was an MVP. And now the Cubs had to give him away to the Yankees to just take his contract. The Cubs, which is a big market team. That's how things happen in baseball, and that's not unusual. So I look at this lineup, and I'm like, okay, Ramirez is great. Kwan is very good. My second best hitter is Kwan, who's okay, good hitter, is little power, and he's my second best hitter. My third best hitter is probably Carlos Santana, who's almost 40. And listen, he was still good last year, but he could easily, and I love Carlos, and I'm sure you love him, but he could easily go off a cliff. Everybody else is a massive question mark. I trust Lane Thomas against lefties. I think, we know he's going to hit well against lefties. I don't trust him against righties, and I don't trust anybody else that does. Listen, I get it. Rocchio has talent. Some of the guys they're considering at second base have talent. Certainly, we could see Chase DeLauder at some point in the outfield. Kyle Manzardo has a lot. I get it, but to expect them all to come through is unrealistic. And just like you're hoping all could come through, what if none of them come through? If none of them come through, this lineup's horrible. Horrible. Give me, besides Jose Ramirez, is there a player you're absolutely sure will hit 20 home runs this year?
Manzardo would probably be the closest thing I could say, but am I 100% sure? No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. I actually think Kwan, I think he could be like you have like your MVP candidates, Judge, Ramirez, Gunnar Henderson. I think Kwan can be the tier below that because we saw he hit for some power last year and didn't sacrifice
the
contact. And I wonder his swoon in September there. I wonder how much of that was injury related.
Yeah,
because he looked great in the playoffs again.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you're betting on everybody reaching their ideal scenario here,
right?
And that's such a risky game to play, and it's not one you should have to play when you're on the doorstep of the World Series. And look, I know people are going to yell, "Well, the TV deal." You know what?
That's bullshit.
I know that they're going to make less on their TV deal this year, but they acted like they were making less every year for the last 5 years. They didn't do anything a year ago in the offseason because they weren't sure if they were going to go back to Bally's or they were going to go to MLB. They stuck with Bally's. They didn't make 100% of what they normally make, but they made pretty close to it. And so they pocketed all of that.
That's right.
So then why, after a season you just had, why can't you get uncomfortable? Like, I don't get it. And I don't like, I'm so tired of the ownership conversation and just yelling, but they don't give people a reason to talk about any other narrative.
That's right.
And I just don't get it. I don't get what we're doing here. It's you're going on 77 years since you won a World Series and you get this close. And like, if you're an owner and you're Clevelanders and you wanted to buy the team because you're Clevelanders and you have passion for the franchise. And I've gone on the same rant on the same podcast before. And you're only going to own the team for a couple more years. Like, why would you not try to leave your mark? Why would you not try to do whatever you can do to make it happen when you get this close? I don't get it.
It's stunning. It's frustrating.
The other side of this is that we can yell and rant and all that stuff. And odds are they're going to find a way to squeeze as much out of the talent that they have. And it'll result in like 88 wins and a division title. And, it makes you have to have a more nuanced argument than just yelling about being cheap.
Sure. And the problem is, and why that might not happen, and I'm not ready to say it won't, but this division's better.
Mm-hmm.
The Royals and Tigers, I think, are just getting started. I mean, they've got young talent. The Tigers have a lot of good young pitchers. And the frustrating thing is this is the only division in baseball. And I get teams like the Twins and used to be the Tigers, not as much. At times the White Sox, not right now, will spend more than the Guardians, but there's not one big spender in this division where you're like, we can't keep up with that team.
These teams haven't done, like, I thought the Tigers would make a splashy move. They should go get Alex Bregman. The Royals should try to improve on the margins if they can.
Right.
I've been surprised by that too. And then again, it's not the Guardians aren't the only team operating this way, but that's not an excuse.